Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Joseph Ross here with me today. How you doing, Joseph?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Glad to be here, Cedric.
Absolutely. I'm happy to have you here too. Hey, I wanted to say hello to everybody out there, whether you be on Roku TV, Apple TV, Android TV, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon Fire, E360 TV. Thank you for tuning in. It means a lot to us each and every time you do. And for those of you who haven't heard the news yet, this is going to be the week of our season finale. And I'll give you more updates on that as the week progresses. But I want to say hello to Calvin Pogue in the building. How you doing, Calvin, out there? And if anybody else is tuned in and you felt you haven't been acknowledged, I want to say hi to you. Drop comments in the chat tonight. If you have a reaction, hit the like emoji, hit the emotion buttons, and let Facebook and YouTube know that you're feeling our show. And without further ado, Joseph, where are you from?
I'm from a house full of books.
Wow. Okay. I like that.
Yeah, we had a house full of books. My parents both had, on both their bedside tables, stacks of books. We were the kids who got dragged to the library every week, especially in the summer. Did all of those library programs, and I thought that was the coolest thing, to get whatever I got at the end of the summer for reading however many books it was.
Right.
But that was a huge part of my childhood, and it clearly colored the rest of my life. And the other thing I think I would say is that I come from a house where we were really taught to see the world kind of from the bottom up.
What's that mean?
It means my dad was a laborer. My mom didn't work outside the house, and they were both the products of the Depression. So we didn't ever lack anything we needed, but we didn't ever have as much as what I felt like most other kids around me had. Mm-hmm. But we were taught to really see the world from that perspective. That is to say, how does this new law or how does this new idea affect people who don't have much? Mm-hmm. And that has always been the perspective that I was raised with. That was always the perspective I was raised with. So I feel like those two things are where I'm from, as much as the zip code, Mm-hmm. And the zip code was right outside of Los Angeles.
Okay. So you were born outside of Los Angeles.
A little town called Pomona, California. Yeah, about 25 miles east of downtown LA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of those books that were in your house. I know that when you're growing up and you have books and books and books in your house, some of those books you look at throughout the years. Some of those books become near and dear to you, and they take on characters of their own over the years. What were some of the books that were in your home growing up?
Well, a couple that I really especially remember, and as my students would say, it's been a minute. I mean, this is decades ago.
Yeah.
One of the first books I remember really falling in love with was a kind of a children's biography of Saint Francis of Assisi.
Okay.
This wealthy kid in 13th century Italy who thought that who thought that for him in his Christian world, that to really follow that faith he had to get rid of everything, and he walked away from everything and gave his life to the poor. And that kind of radicality, that kind of focus, I don't know, boy, as a kid of 8 or 9 maybe, that just really grabbed me.
Wow.
Another thing, a couple of years later, I remember in 7th grade, we had a teacher who read out loud to us. In 7th grade, seems like a little bit old to be reading out loud to kids in a classroom, but it was magical when she did this. And she read the Narnian Chronicles to us by C.S. Lewis, mm-hmm. This kind of fantasy series, 6 or 7 books. But it's really kind of about morality, really. It's about kids going to another world. So it had that kind of appeal, but it also had a deep kind of living right, living justly kind of thing. And a third that was a little bit older when I got to into high school reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. As I tell my students now, it changed the way I think about everything.
Wow.
And not only his rhetoric, the way he could speak and compel and inspire people, but the way that he changed over the course of his life, the kind of clarity with which he saw America in his time. Anyway, so those are a few, but yeah,
Okay.
those books
Okay.
stay with me. I could keep talking about books, but yeah.
Well, I think the world of books is an endless discovery.
Yeah.
It is an endless conversation about the world we live in and how they continue to form and grow us.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the way that you read books and the way that books influenced you growing up. So, we could continue that conversation, but for now, let's talk a little bit more about your actual upbringing. And so your parents were products of, you said, the Great Depression. So they were,
so they were careful with their money. You know, they saved like they were like crazy. They didn't. I mean, like I said, we didn't lack anything. I was never hungry. Significantly, but we didn't have fancy stuff. We didn't go on super fancy vacations. We went camping.
There were rules in your house.
Oh, for real. Yeah. And they were both people who honesty was huge to them. Hard work was huge to them. Making something useful of your life for other people. The idea that, you were simply out to wealth for the sake of wealth or something it wasn't as an option. It was seen as selfish.
Did you ever have conversations about living a meaningful life as you were growing up?
Yeah, probably. I don't remember any of those with my parents until I was in high school, but I certainly remember it then. I was the first in my family to go to college.
Oh yeah.
And boy, I knew why I was there. I mean, I knew that graduation day when I got my undergraduate degree, that meant way more to my parents than it did to me.
Wow.
I think I knew that I probably would go on further. I knew that, as when you go through something, you sort of know how legit some of it was and how BS some of it was. And, but to my parents, the fact that I finished this thing, it meant that they succeeded. And we talked about that a lot.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I just have one sister. Yeah.
Okay.
And she's a couple years older. She went to school. She went to college too, but she didn't finish. And, she's done great. She's had 4 beautiful kids and is a really fine person. But didn't finish the academic side of it like that.
What was your relationship like with your sister growing up?
That's interesting.
One boy, one girl. One wants a car and a cowboy. Another one wants a Barbie doll.
And we went to different schools because we went to the same grade school for some years, but in 7th grade or at the end of 6th grade, I got put into Catholic school and she stayed in the public schools. And then I went on to Catholic high school too. And so our friend circles, when friends really mattered, middle school and high school, were completely different. So in some ways we sort of grew apart. We're pretty close now. And we as you get, and I'm older, she's 2 years older than I am, but as you go through things and now, we've buried both of our parents and the interesting thing I see now looking back is that, in part, I think because of the gender difference too, her experience of our parents was very different than mine. I think partly because I was a boy and partly because I was younger, or the second kid, I bet I got to do more I got less hassle from our parents than she did. Although my parent, I guess, do I think of my parents as strict? I guess they were sort of strict, but they were more strict with her than they
Right.
were
Yeah.
with me. And it's always something interesting to recognize is that when your sibling, you know, an adult sibling says something and you're like, wow, that's how you saw that way back then?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't see it like
Yeah.
that.
That's huge. That's
Yeah.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have brothers and sisters. I'm the oldest of um several brothers
Oh,
and sisters. And
well, being the
we
oldest is different too. Yeah.
yeah. And we have conversations about different memories, and I've learned to really listen to my siblings' perspectives. Like, they don't all have my perspective, just like you're saying.
Right.
And sometimes it can be enlightenment for you to listen to the perspective of one of your siblings, and how interesting it is that we all see things through different lenses.
Right.
I think that's one of your initial indications of the way that the world really works, which is people don't see things the way you do. You think that because I'm sitting next to you and we're sharing things and we sometimes we share the same spaces, that we see things the same way, but we don't. And such is life.
Yeah.
Such is life.
Yeah.
What was middle school like for you?
It was tough because I started in 7th grade in a new school, in a Catholic grade school, which was small, and the kids in my class had all been in the same class together for 6 years.
Yeah, that's tough. Talk about that dynamic a little bit. I don't think we explore that enough.
Well, I was the outsider, and I was one of the public school kids, which to them meant that I was sort of rough or lawless or something, which of course couldn't have been farther from the truth, but that's still how they saw me, I think. I became better friends with those folks over the years and I got to know them through high school and even went to college with a couple of them. But initially I was and even through high school, I think I was super self-conscious, thought everybody was looking at me, which of course nobody was, but I just felt like I was always going to be judged. I was figuring out sexual orientation stuff as well. And so was always never fully at home in my own skin, I think, in those years. Really self-conscious.
Talk to me about your transition into high school. What was it like for you in high school? Did you meet people who offered a safe space for you to have effective conversations about all this stuff in high school?
About some of it, yes. Okay. About some of it, and my experience mostly in high school, and this was in the 70s, was at the time it was mostly positive. I was figuring things out. First couple of years of high school, thought I would be a basketball player, and that didn't work out. Wasn't really a great student. When I think back to those books I was telling you about earlier, like reading was the first thing I did well.
Okay.
And I could always do that pretty well in school, but that doesn't mean I took tests well, or, I still didn't. I was very much a B- kind of student in school. I was not a great student. I wouldn't really find my footing that way until later in my life. And just always trying to figure out, how do you make friends? How do you, I just felt like I wasn't ever fully myself until some years later, probably not until the later years of college. Yeah.
Would you say that your formative years took precedent over everything else that was going on around you in terms of personal development? Some people are able to ignore themselves, ignore their feelings, and focus on school. Some of those kids, they're the kids who they're getting straight A's, or they're high performers. They're funny. Everybody loves them. But then you talk to them and discover it's because they're not thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about, how they're developing. They're simply just in the moment.
Yeah.
But it sounds like for you, you were hearing all of those internal signals that were shooting off in your brain and your heart. You were having this sort of internal conversation with yourself, and then school was an afterthought. Is that
Yes, but I still was going through it. It was sort of
Mm.
like being on two roads at the same time, or
Yeah.
compartmentalizing things. I've got to do school now, and
Hmm.
then you come home or you go back to the dorm, and you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna look inside my life, and it's a mess." But
Hmm.
tomorrow at 8 o'clock, I'm going to be back in that classroom, and
Hmm.
the mess is going to be buttoned up, at least until the next time I open it up.
Hmm.
So I think in some ways I was sort of having both those things happen at the same time, though not exactly at the same moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, your ability to sort of toe the line could be seen as a gift. You're kind of gifted in that regard. A lot of people are completely unable to toe that line. But looking back in retrospect, what would you say to a young person today who is dealing with that same sort of anxiety, who could use some tips or advice or some wisdom from you?
Go easy on yourself.
Mm.
Go easy on yourself. I can tell you a story where I've tried to use a memory to go back and sort of heal something. I got cut from the basketball team as a 10th grader, and my parents had bought me these shoes, to use at high school, and that was kind of a big deal, to buy these shoes.
Yeah, it was.
And we were driving, we were being driven. I think my mom was driving us home, me and another kid, and I wasn't going to tell my mom that I got cut until I was ready, till later.
Yeah.
And this kid, this other kid who was just in our carpool, he blurts it out to my mom, who then looks in the rearview mirror, and I can just remember sitting in the back seat wishing I could just die,
Mm.
And since then, I remember I've done this exercise of like my grown self walking up to that car, back door of the car, opening it up, and taking that kid out of the car, that 10th grade kid out of the car, and talking to him and saying, it is okay. 10th grade basketball, who the hell cares? Of course, it was life and death to me at that moment.
That's right.
But I needed to go back and sort of help that kid, because that kid's he's still in here too. He's not completely healed.
Mhm.
Or, I can look back and laugh and tell you the story. And,
Yeah.
but, I'm 150 years old. I shouldn't remember this,
No, man. It's okay. It's okay for you to not only remember this, but remind us, everybody who's watching this show, that there are young adults, there are full grown adults.
Yeah.
But right now we're talking about the younger folks who are dealing with this. We have 444,000 youth in the foster care system today. Many of them are dealing with these types of anxieties. Maybe you or a child in your life is not in the system. Maybe they're not in the child welfare system, but they're still going through this anxiety of trying to figure out who they are, dealing with different levels of rejection, trying to figure out how to become confident. It's one of the greatest challenges of your teenage years. Is how do I show up as this confident person? Maybe like this one or that one, but how do I do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we should all be reminded that we have to provide experiences that help build confidence in children and in young adults. And maybe there are adults in your life. Maybe you need a confidence building exercise. So go out there and find some confidence building exercises. Maybe you need to go back and have a conversation with that child in your life.
Right. Yeah. When a person told me, just imagine, almost like have a fantasy about going to the back seat of that car and taking that kid out. When a person told me that, I thought it sounded sort of goofy.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't tell you how helpful it's been.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that can be a really useful thing. And I think, now even as a teacher of many years, often you'll be talking to other teachers or counselors or something, and to me the question is about a student where there's some concern is, where is this student succeeding? Like, where is this student finding success? And sometimes it's in my class. Everything may be every building burning for this kid and the rest of his schedule, but in English he's rocking it. And then the other teachers are usually relieved to hear that, and sometimes it's not in my class. Sometimes somebody is really not doing well in English, but they're doing great in other things, and then I'm less concerned. It's not everybody doesn't have to rock English. But I think that thing of both being able to go back and speak to yourself, be easy, remind yourself to be easy on yourself, to almost be able to heal that kid, as well as where is success happening? Because everybody's not good at everything, but everybody needs to have some success somewhere.
That's right.
Even if it's a
success for you,
seemingly small area.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, now as you move through high school, what were your ideas about your own future? Who did you think that you'd become?
In high school, I'm really not sure I knew. I knew I could read, I could write. I liked my English classes. Typically, I knew that I struggled like crazy with math and science. So I just knew I not only wasn't going to, but couldn't do those things. And yet I knew, given like what I said earlier about my parents and all, I knew I was going to college. That just had to happen. And like I said, this was back in the 70s when it wasn't, you weren't mortgaging your future just to try to go to college. I mean, it was much, much simpler. When I tell my high school students today, like what tuition was at my school, they sort of faint, like they just can't believe it.
Hey, can you talk to us about what was happening in your world outside of school during these years? We're talking about the 70s. What was happening socially outside of school during that time? Be a time machine, if you will. Go back and talk to us. What was happening outside? What was on the news? What was the big deal back then?
Well, I can tell you one particular story that had a big effect on something I wrote recently. And I remember laying in our front room watching TV. My dad was sitting in kind of an easy chair. I was laying on a couch. I was 10. It was 1968. And I remember the front door, we lived on kind of a busy street. The front door was open, but the screen door was closed. So you could hear the traffic from the street. Like I said, we were like 25 miles away from downtown LA, and Dr. King had been assassinated. And I don't think I was a little bit aware of sort of who he was and what he meant. And I lived in a relatively diverse neighborhood, though did not go to a diverse school. But remember watching on the news all kinds of upheaval in Los Angeles, so not very far away, and asking my dad, like, what's going on? Like, what's all that? And he said, well, Dr. King was killed, and there's terrible riots in LA.
Wow. And
I just remember kind of laying there on the couch thinking, it was maybe, I don't know, kind of one of the first times I thought, am I safe? Is this safe? And it was an occasion in which the outer world, about which I didn't know very much, interrupted, or it pushed in on my life. And at least in a very minimal way. Our house didn't get burned down like so many houses in LA did. We didn't suffer like that. But it became a focus for me. And then, as I said, not too many years later, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and then later really reading and teaching Dr. King's life and work over the course of many years, and then recently writing a book of poems about him, he's become a really central part of my, I don't know, sort of political vision or my way I see the world. I'm really one of those people now who thinks if more people really knew his life and work, the world would be better. And pushing back against what I think is a really deliberate kind of whitewashing of his life and work, as if the only thing he ever said was, I have a dream or something. Whereas his really sharp critiques of American culture and really cultures around the world is really important and could really change things if we knew more about it. But so that was, I mean, I was 10 years old in 68, not an adult by any stretch, but beginning to be aware of what the world, of a little bit of what the world was like. And as I said, raised by parents who taught us to look at the world from the perspective of people who suffer. And that's made me. I mean, that's influenced everything.
Have you ever considered yourself any sort of an empath to the lives of other people? Are you?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope so. I think empathy is maybe the most important thing, most important trait humans can have, and can cultivate. I do think it's a skill like anything else. I think we have to practice it. And it's one of the reasons why I wasn't trying to make this segue, but it's one of the reasons why I think literature is so important, because literature is one of the first places, or stories is some of the first places where we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody else.
Yeah.
We care about a character, or we hate a character, or we love a character. But we feel something for that character. And literature is often the first place where that happens. And then we begin to, learn it and hopefully, develop it kind of for real.
We talked a little bit about your discovery of the autobiography of Malcolm X. And before we go to the break, can you talk to us a little bit about the impact that book had on you?
Sure. I think a couple things that really struck me, and I think I just focused on the character of the man, almost like treating it like a novel, and like he's a character. Like, what is this person like? Where the autobiography has a whole lot more in it than just him, but his observations about America were almost like what I probably was raised with in school, and kind of from a white perspective, for lack of a better way to say it, turned completely upside down. Or the better image is, imagine looking at the world through a telescope and seeing something, and then imagine turning it around completely and you see it very differently. And that's what he offered me, I think, was this experience of, wow, here is somebody who is looking at the same city, the same problem, the same hunger, this homelessness, the same social realities that I look at, and he is seeing it from an entirely different perspective. I've never heard this. This is new. This is fresh. And I experienced some of that with Dr. King too, but I really didn't read his work and life until later. But yeah, I think that's the effect it had on me, was that. And then also the profound change that he went through, or changes that he went through all through his life. Probably, I might not have liked Malcolm Little very much. I might not, he went by Detroit Red. I might not have liked that guy very much. He was a pretty rough character. But I think I would have liked the guy later in his life. I think I would have been challenged by him profoundly, but still learn from him and admire him. And in discussions with students about that book, he still teaches me. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody, we're talking to Joseph Ross, and we've had a great conversation. If you're just now tuning in, we're going to talk more about the work that he does today and more of his perspectives on life, the world, and literature. Everybody sit tight. America's Next Motivator, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network and our viewership. And we're back. Hey, Joseph, how you feeling out there?
I feel good. How about you?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling great.
Good.
Right back into it. Now, you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and but later in life, you began to read more into the works of Martin Luther King. And when you said that, I was compelled to champion that with you. I've gone back and listened to many of Martin Luther King's speeches, and I had a book called "Say It Plain," which had his. There was a DVD. An audio version of his speeches in the front of the book, but then you could actually read through his speeches in that book. And I can also attest to the fact that there are great discoveries to be made by all of us if we would go back and actually read more of his perspectives, his speeches, and his work. Talk to us about Martin Luther King's influence, Martin Luther King Jr.'s influence on you. And if you have any poetry or anything that associates with Martin Luther King, feel free to share it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I read a lot of his work in college. I can still see myself. There was this kind of basement level of the library at Loyola Marymount University in LA. And I was sitting in this easy chair with my feet up on the edge of this fountain and reading his works. Depending on how you count it, he wrote 6 or 7 books. And 3 of them, scholars call his political autobiography. Stride Toward Freedom. He writes when he's about 26 years old. It's all about the Montgomery bus boycott. He's a young man, just married, brand new PhD in Montgomery, Alabama. His second book he writes called Why We Can't Wait. It's about the violence of 1963. He's a little bit older, been knocked around a little bit, and it reflects that. And then his last book, and there are a couple books in between there, but his last book is called Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? He writes that in the last year of his life. It's post-Nobel Peace Prize. He's been living with death threats for years at that point. He is a very different person. I would say in some ways he has a deeper vision of his work there. It's also a little bit heavier in terms of the cost that it was to him, that his life felt like for him. And so a few years ago, back in the late 80s, I began teaching his life and work when I was in grad school at Notre Dame. And then when I moved to DC in 2000, and for a couple of years, I taught at American University, and I taught a composition class just using those 3 books of Dr. King's. So a book when he was 27, a book about 1963, and then the last year of his life. And the whole time I was teaching that class, I kept thinking, this is a book of poems. To take excerpts from each of those books, essentially going from Montgomery to Memphis, where he'd be killed, and writing poems that respond to different moments of his life. And so that's what I did. This book called Raising King.
You wrote a book called Raising King?
Yeah. It's a book of, and it has 3 sections. Those 3 sections: Stride Toward Freedom, Why We Can't Wait, and Where Do We Go From Here? Let me read the first poem. It's called Martin Luther King Jr. Prologue. 1. In the beginning was a boat, swollen with humans history would call slaves. The men who loved these boats thought they knew Jesus. They prayed Jesus. They ate Jesus. Their boat cut the waters like a whip, leaving a weeping scent in its churning wake. The moon lit the water around the boat, but the moon did not light the boat. The boat worked through the waters in the dark. Now the boat is dust. The whip survives. 2. A man came who was not a slave. He was not the moon, its light, or the water. Like the boats before him, he too cut the water, but he was not the whip. He had bones the whip could not reach, but he was not the bones. He had light to cut the darkness, but he was not the light. He met the darkness when the whip became a bullet. The man stood, and the bullet came. His bones are dust. The man survives.
Wow.
So just the opening, and then it really moves into kind of historical poems about really different events from Montgomery all the way to Memphis. Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Thanks. Thank you.
When did you write that?
It came out in September of 2020, just last September. I probably finished that first poem in probably sometime in 2019, 2018, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people sometimes I think I've been working on these poems for 20 years, not literally, but in my head, I've been thinking about his life. I've been, in some ways, writing these poems in a figurative way for a long time, but probably really began the project in about 2013, and it took a lot of cutting down and unlike other books, because this is such a different kind of book, all focused on one person, and it took longer. Yeah.
When did you actually start writing poetry? And hold on, it's a compound question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Like, when did you not only start writing poetry, but when did you realize that the thoughts that you were expressing would be considered poetry?
Well, probably, I mean, even in high school and college, I was writing some poetry, but I played guitar, so I was writing songs. And I think I sort of thought of it as kind of as sort of like poetry. Okay. Then. I can look back now, it's not healthier, but I would look back and say it was pretty bad poetry. I mean, it was young poetry. That's what I should say. I shouldn't judge it. But I began to take it a lot more seriously when I was in graduate school and really trying to learn the craft more, learn what the craft would be for me, elements of surprising language, giving myself permission to step away from rhyme, that kind of thing, that everything didn't have to sound like Mary Had a Little Lamb or something. Rhyming poetry can be very powerful sometimes, but I didn't feel like it worked for me. And so finding ways to say things that were still surprising, and I hope still sometimes beautiful, or maybe beautiful but not pretty, but began to take it much more seriously in the 90s. And then I didn't publish a book of poems until 2012. So came to publishing kind of a little bit later than some other poets, but okay. Yeah. I came to see that I think it happened in my own life first, and then it translates into teaching. I came to see that, and I think about it using this kind of language, that literature confronts and consoles. There are ways that it consoles, and by that I mean like it makes us more ourselves. It tells us you're okay. It confirms the validity of our own experience or our own feelings. And that's good. And a lot of us need that. And some young people especially need that more than anything. They need to see themselves in stories. They need to feel empowered by a story, feel like I can do that, seeing a character do something. But it also confronts, meaning that it sort of shows us what we don't know. That's what the autobiography of Malcolm X did to me. I don't think reading him didn't console me. Reading him confronted me, which is what somebody who, as I like to say to my students, who's been told he's white, which is what people who like me need. We need the confrontation. The world was built to console us, but it wasn't built to console everybody. So we need to be confronted with that privilege. And so that we can, I think, admit it and find our way out of it and find ways to stop it and or to spread it to everyone. Can I tell you two stories about this?
Sure.
In the classroom? Here's, I think of these two stories. For the last 10 years at Gonzaga, the school I've been at for 9 years, I've been teaching American literature, this rediscovering this whole body of work, and especially rediscovering, discovering really for the first time, Frederick Douglass. And I could talk forever about him. He's really become my great American hero, and I really think the essential American founder. But we read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. He wrote 3 autobiographies, and this is his first one. He writes the story of his life, and he's about 27 years old. He'll write 2 more that will cover a pretty long life. But we're reading this. His words are so powerful. He puts the experience of being enslaved, of escaping, and of becoming this great activist for abolition in such crisp, vivid ways. And I can see at the end of a class, I don't remember what we had discussed exactly from the narrative, but Keyshawn Alexander, this junior, big kind of football player kid, everybody else is getting up and getting their stuff back in their book bags, getting out of the room. And he's kind of still sitting in his desk, almost looks like he's going to cry or something. And that's not him, you know? Mm-hmm. So I kind of make my way over there, and I said, Keyshawn, you all right? And he said to me, I've never seen words do this before. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh man, that's why I came today. Like, that's why I came to school. That's why I came to school today. You know, like, so that story from Frederick Douglass consoled him. It told a story that he knew in some ways, but probably didn't know the details, and certainly had never heard it described so powerfully and beautifully. It consoled him.
So let me get this straight before you go into what's next.
Well, that's good.
You decided as an alleged white man in America to put together a curriculum that will be thought-provoking and compelling to a diverse body of students. And you offered this work of Frederick Douglass in your class. And this young man, now was this young man, is he a black young African-American? Or
Yeah, I should have said that. Yes.
So he is so inspired at his work that he asked you, what did he ask you? Can you say it again?
He said, I've just never seen words do this before.
Right. I've never seen words do this before. So your decision to offer this in a curriculum gave him the opportunity to discover the power of words. Now, this is one of the reasons why you are America's Next Motivator tonight. This is one of the moments where you relate to thousands and millions of people across the country and the world, because when we discover the power of words, then we discover our power as human beings. And the backdrop of this type of discovery is all types of unhelpful media. Stuff like talk is cheap. I'm more of a doer than a speaker. Oh, words don't mean anything. Well, it depends on what words you're listening to, because the right series and connection of words can stain your amygdala in a way that now you're going to become a totally different person than you were going to become before you took in these words.
Yeah.
So now, what was Keyshawn inspired to do after hearing this series?
Well, and I'm not sure I know for sure. I know that he went on to Morehouse College, and you know, like some students I do stay in touch with. He's not one that I have stayed in great touch with him, but his saying that, and the way that he said it, and that it was so out of character for him. I mean, he was just clearly, he was a tough, hard kid. At least that was the exterior he showed in my classroom. Mm-hmm. But not that day, and not after that. And I would say in some ways, you know, I mean, I like to think, you know, teachers set the table, but you know, Frederick Douglass is the one who changed him. I provided the occasion, and I made him, you know, or I assigned him to read it. You know, he knew he was going to have a test, so he had to read it. Mm-hmm. But Douglass did the work. It was the life of Douglass that did it. Mm-hmm. And now Douglass had already done it to me. Mm-hmm. He continues doing it to me. But he sure that just, and I would say Douglass does that to, you know, dozens of students in my classes every year. But the way Keyshawn said that one day, I mean, I will just never forget it. And he said it so crisply and so cleanly.
Go ahead.
No. And that was an example of the consoling that I'm saying that literature can do.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, here's a way it confronted somebody. A couple of years, just 2 years ago, a white student named Quinn. We were discussing a particular part of Douglas's narrative in which he's essentially watching his grandmother being put out into the woods to starve to death, and it's an awful scene. And one of the things that I also am always concerned about in teaching, like you talked about, my choosing to have the students read this text. It's a crucial text to read. It's also a brutal text. Like I don't think of my grandmother when I read that section, but I bet Keyshawn Alexander did. And I'm not always aware of how the Black students in my class how do they experience the violence of the story? And it's not fiction. It's truth. Mm-hmm. So Quinn, same thing. People are packing up. We've just discussed this, pretty horrible scene. Quinn is a white kid. And he kind of hangs in his desk. His head's kind of down, like something is grabbing him. And same thing. You'd think I'd have better questions, but I said, Quinn, you doing all right? He says, "It was that bad, wasn't it?"
Mm.
And I just said, "Yeah, I think it was." Yeah. So, here's a white kid who, because of the words of Douglas, is seeing the history of his country in a much more vivid and realistic way.
Right.
The literature is confronting him, where it consoled a student of color.
Yeah.
And, there are lots of ways that those different things can rattle around kids' lives. But those are just two stories for me that really illustrate that power that literature has, that a good story or, a good writer has to change somebody, to comfort them. And, in the end, as you said, to make their life different. And, I totally believe that those guys and lots of others are making different choices in their lives because of things that they read.
Did you ever suggest to your students that they could or should write poetry as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I can tell you a ton of stories about all of that. So, now we have creative writing poetry classes at my school. We have a poetry club. And interestingly enough, people are always surprised at that. Well, I teach, it's an all boys school here in DC. But the two biggest supporters of the school of the poetry club are the head football coach and the head basketball coach.
Okay.
And they really urge their players to get into this. And, they don't all, of course, but a handful of them do each year. And it pushes them, it opens them in ways that they didn't imagine.
Right.
And people see them, in the school, then people see them very differently. Like, wait, isn't that the line? Didn't that kid play outside linebacker?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. He just read that. That's his poem in the school paper.
Right.
I'm like, why are you surprised?
Yeah. Poetry gives an avenue for us. When I say us, I'm talking about everybody. It gives us an avenue to express ourselves. It gives us the authority to just say something. It doesn't have to be too long, doesn't have to be too fancy, but you'd be surprised at what comes out of our people when they're prompted to write pieces of poetry. I see poetry as an avenue that we should continue to use in schools, and even that adults can do. I wonder what some adults out there will come up with if they decided to just write a poem, find a muse in your life, and express yourself based off of it. What do you say to people who are either getting into poetry or who are poets out there today and just want to take things to the next level?
I say dive in and get to the details. I say a good poem says something. It does need to say something, I think. But in some ways, the power of poetry, sometimes the initial attraction is you can write whatever you want. There's no rules, and that's true. So, if you hand in an essay, or you say, if I say, Cedric, I want you to write me an essay about this and this and this, you think, oh, crap, it's got to be right. It's got to be punctuation's got to be right. It's got to be spelled right, but a poem works. I would say it works here, and you can't see me, but I'm pointing at my gut. Like a poem works on the heart and on the gut. Essays work on the brain, and that's terribly important. But so's this, and so if you can express the things that are really on your heart, or the things that are really kind of in your gut, whether it's just writing a poem for your own pleasure, for your own catharsis, like just trying to get something out, whether it's a great sadness or a great joy. You can be a private poet that way and never show it to anybody. That's still a perfectly legitimate way to be a poet. There are people who write poems and just share them with their families. Maybe they just share them with their circle of friends. And then there are folks, who send them out to journals and other things. All that's legit. But I think really just digging into your own life, looking at the things that hurt you, the things that give you great joy, that's all really important stuff to write poems about.
Sure. Now, what have you been able to do with poetry? I think I read somewhere that you were featured in New York Times Magazine. What was that like? And you were featured some other places as well. I mean, you're not just like isolated with this. You've received exposure and attention for the things you've written. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in lots of ways I've been very fortunate. I've had poems published individually in lots of places, different journals, poetry, literary journals, the New York Times Magazine, the LA Times. In some ways, to me, the books are sort of more important, or it feels like that kind of matters to me because there's a whole collection of things.
Talk about those too, your books. Talk about them. We've only talked about Raising King so far. Talk about your other 3 titles.
Well, the one just before Raising King was called Ache, and it's a kind of it's got a whole bunch of. I mean, I'd been writing for a couple of years and pulled a bunch of things out and just spread them out all over the bed. And as I kind of began to like group poems together, I sort of needed to see them, visually to see them all together. Began to see sort of groupings and realized these poems are all about some kind of ache or some kind of a deep feeling. And pretty soon I realized I had a manuscript, or I had very close to kind of a full book there, and kind of then wrote, saw some sections and, yeah. So let me read one from Ache. Is that okay?
Sure. We're down to the final 30 seconds of the show. Let's go.
Oh, no. Okay. It's gonna take a shade longer.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. For Gilberto Ramos, he was a 15-year-old Guatemalan boy who died in the Texas desert in 2014.
Okay.
Before you left, your mother draped you with 50 Hail Marys, a rosary of white wood, a constellation she hoped might guide you. But Texas does not know these prayers. It knows that desert air is thirsty, and you are made of water. It drank you slowly. Your name only linked to your body by the string of aves still around your neck, the small cross pressing against your wooden skin, the color of another cross. You left your home on May 17th with 1 change of clothes and 2 countries ahead of you. Your brother's phone number hidden on the back of your belt buckle, so the coyote couldn't find it. The coyotes pray in the language of extortion. The phone number was found by a Texas official whose name your brother couldn't remember. She called and spoke in the language of bones. He translated her news into pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. His prayer meant brother, a word he kept moist, just beneath his tongue.
Wow. Joseph Ross, what is survival to you?
Survival is making some sense of this human life that we have, making something beautiful out of it, whether it's a poem or a painting or a child or a career, or a husband or a wife.
Okay.
Making something beautiful out of this human life.
What is success to you? Final 15 seconds.
Success is making someone else's life better.
What is greatness to you?
Dr. King wrote, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. And I think serving is what makes you great, not the other way around.
Joseph Ross, I want to let you know that we've listened to your story today. I want to give you your respect today. And we're going to give you your crown today while you're still here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, put your crown emojis into the chat. Ladies and gentlemen, put your crown emojis into the chat. Put your crown emojis into the chat. We are letting you know, letting the world know that you, Joseph Ross, you are America's next motivator.
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for stopping by today, all right?
Thank you.
Yes, sir. There you have it. Each and every episode of America's Next Motivator is going to have something here for you. All you've got to do, just like you did tonight, stop by and pick it up.